We're still learning about properties that we could set on a flex container. You've learned that we could set properties on a flex container and also on flex items. In fact, when we go to CSS Tricks, their flex guide, which is like the best thing ever. I was so happy when I found this when I was learning flexbox. If we go here, they divide up. Like the left side is what the properties you could set on the flex container. The right side are the properties you could set on flex items. We've learned all that. We've learned most of the properties that we set on the flex container. We saw display flex makes it a flex container. Flex direction determines row, column, and row reverse, column reverse. Flex wrap determines whether or not you wrap when you get to the end of the line or no wrap. And then flex flow is shorthand for flex direction and flex wrap. And justify content, it moves things along the main axes, the primary axes, the main axes. When I learned flexbox, the course I took, they called it the primary axes, and it was way too complicated. They made it way too complicated, the course I took. Anyhow, justify content moves things along the primary axes. So if I have flex direction row, my main axis is a row, and justify content will move things along the row. If my flex direction is column, then my main axis is column, and justify content will move things along the column. Cool. The next two that we have to learn are align items and align content. Okay, so align is always going to, whether it's align items or align content, align is always going to operate on the cross axes. Okay, so align items, align content, they both operate on the cross axes. Align items will allow you to do the exact same thing as justify content, the same thing justify content does on the main axes. Align items does the exact same thing on the cross axes, right? So you can just think, cool, that's what, it's the exact opposite, just doing the same thing on the cross axes as justify content. Align content, you can kind of see that in the picture here. The different values I could set for align items. And by the way, if I'm aligning items at the top and at the bottom and in the center, and they're moving up and down vertically, that means my cross axis is vertically, my main axis is horizontal, flex direction is row, justify content is going to move along the main axis, which is the row, align items is moving along the things along the cross axes, which is vertical. All right, so this is a representation of basically, right, like here, this is a representation of flex direction row, main axis is row, moving things along the row. And this is also a representation of flex direction row, main axis row, cross axes, vertical, moving things up and down along the vertical. So that's what align items does. Move it to the start with flex start, move it to the end with flex end, move it to the center, stretch it, so you can stretch it, or baseline, which lines up the baseline of text. I have a bunch of examples which illustrate align items in action. You can see all the code here. We have align items with flex start, flex end, center, stretch, baseline, 5 values. Each of those values I created a little scenario for either row or column, so we have 10 different examples. If we look at just the row examples, like here, I'm up at the top of the vertical, I'm at the bottom of the vertical, I'm in the center of the vertical, I'm at the this was stretch. It's not working. It's not stretching anything at all right there. And then that is aligning the baseline, right? Aligning baseline. We'll see if we could get stretch working. All right. So the best way to kind of see this in action, I think, is just to play with it. So there's flex start. This file right here is this file right here where it's flex start, showing you this right there. But I could also do align items, and I could do flex in. And by the way, flex flow here is set to row wrap. This is flex direction, this is flex wrap. So flex direction is row, so my main axis is row, which means align items is operating on the cross axis, which is vertical, so flex end, gonna move it to the bottom vertically. Here we go, kapow. Or center, kapow, right? Or what other ones do we have? We have stretch, kapow, nothing. So why didn't it stretch? Pause the video and look at this code and see if you can figure that out. Did you come up with something? So when I look at it, I think, well, I've specifically set the height. So what if I don't specifically set the height? Stretch. Sweet. I love it. So I'm going to go into the stretch one, which is right here. and that's primary axis is row, and we're going to take out the height on that one, and then we'll go over to the stretch example right here, and that's the stretch example, and hit refresh and it's stretch. Nice. The other thing I just want to point out, right, we're looking at, examples where flex direction is row. So the main axis is row, cross axis is vertical, line items is moving along the vertical. And in this first example, we have flex start, right? Because this is the first file right here where we're dealing with flex start. We're looking at that CSS file. But we're moving things along the cross axes. We can always still go to justify content, and I usually do it in that order because that's the way it's presented at CSS Tricks and a lot of places in that order. But I could go there and I could start moving things along the main axes, right? So this is going to be at the top vertically and at the end horizontally. So it's going to be the top right. Got to go to the right file. Pow, top right. And I killed my height. So I got to turn my height back on if I want it to look good. There's my height. All I did was uncomment the height there. And so you can play this game where you're like, well, how do I get it into the bottom right corner? And I can say, well, bottom right corner, justify content horizontally all to the end, and align items, flex end. Come over here, bottom corner. Can I get it in the center? Well, put it in the center horizontally, put it in the center vertically. Sweet. So now we're moving stuff around. We're getting pretty close to that point where we could go play flexbox froggy and get that frog to jump onto its lily pad. All right, so those are the examples for flex start using, row, flex direction row, and our main axis is row. So align items is moving along the cross axes. So those are examples where flex direction set to row, main axis is row, cross axis is vertical, and just moving along that vertical. On your own time, I want you to go in, like after this video, go in and explore the column examples and look at that code and see if that makes sense to you, where flex direction is not row, but instead flex direction is column. And so the main axis is column, which means the cross axis is horizontal. And align items is then moving things along the cross axes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 examples, right? Align items is now moving things along the cross axes, which is horizontal, right? So, whoa, pretty cool. And then some of it doesn't make sense. Like there's no baseline here on the horizontal because these are vertically stacked, right? In those examples. So anyhow, that's using align items. In the next video, we're going to check out align content and see how align content is different than align items. But remember, whether it's align items or align content, those both operate on the cross axes. And justify content operates on the main axes.